As Brianne said, I'm the head of customer success and sales at Notion. And today I'm going to talk about customer success and sales in early stage SaaS startups, and specifically how I think about setting those teams up for success from the very beginning. Today I'm going to cover a little bit about my relevant background. Then I'm going to share the frameworks that I've found helpful in thinking through how to set these teams up. And then I'll share a few takeaways. And I think there'll be a little bit of time at the end for questions, so please prepare some questions. So my relevant background is my current role at Notion, which I've been there for about 4 months now, and my previous role at Typeform, where I was there for about 5 years. In both of those companies, I joined when there were less than 15 employees. At Typeform, I left when there were over 200, and at Notion, there's now about 25 of us already. In both companies, I was the first hire for the customer success and sales teams, and I lead those teams. At Typeform, I built that team up to 40 people, and at Notion, I'm still a team of 1, and I'm hiring, in case you know anybody. I'd love recommendations. And both of these companies could be considered to be rocket ships, in the sense that very quickly they got to millions of users, tens of thousands of paying customers, and the growth was just very rapid. So that's my very quick background so that you have a little bit of context about what I'm going to share next. And now I'm going to dive into those frameworks. And what I'm going to talk about is how I think about focus, about getting to know our customers, about how to engage with customers, and then about how to execute. So first, focus. At Notion and at Typeform, I was lucky in the sense that both of those companies had a lot of organic traction. We had thousands of signups every day, and that's just because people love both of those products. But there were also different challenges. So at Typeform, we had a low average sales price of only about $20 per user per month, and a relatively high churn of 10% per month. At Notion, we had a few accounts with over 1,000 seats, and our pricing scales with the number of seats. So we had a few customers that were paying us quite a bit of money, and we had strong retention. So even though my role was the same of sales and customer success in both, my focus at the beginning was very different. At Typeform, my focus and the biggest opportunity was reducing churn, so my focus was on customer success. And at Notion, because we already have a good retention rate, the focus was more on how do we get more of those 1,000+ seat deals. So my focus was on sales. But just saying that my focus was on sales, I felt like wasn't enough for me to be truly focused, because in sales, you can easily imagine at Notion 3 sales motions. You have landing a new deal, which is like in green, that number 1 there, a new deal in one department. You can have another motion, which is you've landed in one department, how do we expand within that department? And you can have a third motion, which is we've landed in one department, how do we get the rest of the company to use Notion? And it's tempting to do all 3 of those because they're all quite valuable. But my feedback to our leadership was I could do all 3 of those, but I wouldn't do any of them very well. Because while they're all valuable, they're all quite different sales motions. And so I wanted to focus and make sure I just do 1 well instead of doing 3 not very well. So what we ended up deciding was that my focus would be on landing enterprise deals as my early stage focus, which is still my focus now. And at Typeform, the focus was improving retention through one-to-many proactive engagement strategies. Okay. Once you've created this focus, it's time that we start setting goals. So there's the OKR framework. You start setting the objectives of what you're going to do each quarter. And what I've started doing to, again, my obsession with focus is also saying what I'm not going to do. So when I set goals, I'll say, these are my objectives, and these are the things I'm proactively deciding to say no to. And the reason I call these out is these are things that we may have discussed, in the goal planning discussions, that may be things that we do, but we decided to focus on something else. And I feel like if I don't call that out, which I didn't do for a big part of my career, those things end up creeping in, and I end up diluting my focus and not doing that one thing that's really important, and instead ended up doing more of other things. So this, because it's part of the goals which are shared across the whole company, allow me to more easily just say no to everything that doesn't fall within the 1 or 2 things I really want to do a good job with. So before I go on to the next section, I wanted to share that while at Typeform and at Notion, I had very different focuses. So one was customer success, one was sales, one was one-to-many, and one was one-to-one. I ended up having a very similar strategic approach to the early days of setting things up for customer success and for sales. So that's what I'm going to share now. The first step in both cases is learning about our customers. And there's no shortcut to this. You have to speak to them. So I did, at Notion, I did about 35 customer interviews when I started. And at Typeform, I sent a big survey out, a persona survey, to learn more about our customers. And the objective of speaking to customers and learning from them is not just seeing like what features they use or what features they like, but rather kind of one step back and thinking about their job to be done. So these are some sample, not the questions I asked, but rather like the categories of questions of how did you discover the tool? What initial problem were you trying to solve for your business? What motivated the change? What was your aha moment? What were your decision criteria and the alternatives you explored? What's your current use case? Is it the same as what you initially started to use the tool for? What do you love most and least? And have you ever considered leaving and stopping to use Notion? The other thing that I like to do in these interviews is have an angle or a hypothesis that I'm testing. So I might think that the best use case to expand Notion across the whole company is an employee handbook. And so while I'm interviewing, I'm trying to test that and asking open questions, but always trying to test this hypothesis to learn from customers. This is just a screenshot of what I created in Notion for my customer interviews. So there's each customer, I have notes from the interview, and I also have categorized them so I can more easily kind of pull the analysis of the data. Once you've spoken to customers and learned from what they tell you, it's also important to look at their behaviors and try to categorize them and see what they're doing in your tool. So one example of that is this chart at Typeform. At Typeform, people upgrade because they get access to pro features. And at the bottom, there's pro features 0 to 7. There were 7 pro features at the time. And the red line is the churn rate based on the number of pro features that a customer is using. So you can see that customers who start using 3, 4, or more pro features become a lot less likely to churn. So that's a good insight to know that people who are only using 0, 1, or 2 pro features are much more likely to churn and therefore more at risk, and maybe you need to have some strategies to help them discover more pro features, or maybe discover the use cases that weren't using more pro features. Another example of that, this is also from Typeform, is I grouped customers in saying like high retention, medium retention, low retention, and I grouped them by company size. So on the left, you can see companies from 1 to 10, 11 to 50 employees, 51 to 250, et cetera. And you can see that the companies from 11 to 250 employees are the most likely to have a high retention rate and also the least likely to have a low retention rate. So that kind of helps me understand that our sweet spot, at least at the moment, was companies between 11 and 250 employees. What you do with all of this data, so now we've spoken to customers and we've analyzed their behavior, is start creating the first version of your ideal customer profile. And so this is an example of what one could look like. You can see I've identified a location or geography, what industry, what role, company size, and use case. And the idea is this will not be perfect, and you'll always be iterating on this. But having something that you've created and that you can align with other departments means that we know who we're creating our sales pitch for, and we know which use cases we're promoting in the product. And we can also tell marketing, this is the profile of customer that we want you to bring more of this profile in. So it's quite useful from all aspects of the business. So now that we know what our focus is, and we also have learned a little bit about our customers, it's time to figure out what's our strategy on how we're going to engage with these customers. And I follow this framework when I think about that. So first, I segment them. Then I break the customer journey down into stages that are relevant for them. I create milestones in those stages and touch points. And I'm going to go through that flow. So the first step is segmentation. And of course, you can do a ton of very complex segmentation, but I'd recommend keeping it really simple. You have your high-touch segment, you have your low-touch segment, and your tech-touch segment. The high-touch are the customers that you want to be proactive with. Those are customers that you're building a relationship with and you want to maintain a relationship with going forward. At Notion, that's less than 1% of our user base because we have high volumes. Then we have a just-in-time segment, or the low-touch segment is what I call the just-in-time. So there we're not focused as much on building relationships, but rather focused on generating outcomes. So an example of that would be at Typeform, someone purchased a plan with 5 seats. They've now reached that 5-seat limit. it's an opportunity to engage with them and help achieve that outcome that's beneficial for them and for us of adding more people to their plan. And last, we have the tech touch, which is fully automated. So this is where the incremental cost of each additional sign-up and each additional customer is literally zero. So you don't invest any manual work in these, and you're just thinking of ways to fully automate this. Once you've segmented them, you can start thinking about the customer journey. And ideally, you'll be thinking about the customer journey for different segments. And so the customer journey will be broken down into stages, like onboarding, adoption, retention, and expansion. For each stage, you want to dig in a little bit more and say, this stage is a certain time frame. So example, first 30 days for onboarding. These are the desired outcomes that we want the customer to achieve during that stage. So we want them to have set up their Notion workspace, shared Notion within their company, and collaborating with other people. And then you create some milestones that are actual metrics that you can track of people progressing towards those desired outcomes. So like creating 10 pages, inviting 5 users, and 50% of users have collaborated. This is all fictional information, but it's just to illustrate the concept. So once you've broken down those stages and you know what your customers to achieve at each stage is when you start creating touch points where you're engaging with your customers. So there's two types of touch points. One is scheduled, where it's just an automated touch point at the same time for each customer, like the onboarding emails they'll receive and an NPS survey. And some of them are behavioral. So that's different for each customer, and it's customized based on the customer's behavior. So an example of that is by the end of their onboarding time, these customers haven't invited any new users yet. And then we want to engage with them. But how are we going to engage with them? We're going to use that segmentation model and say, for the customers that fall under that tech touch group, we're going to give them an automated walkthrough tutorial where they don't speak with anybody. For the just-in-time segment, we'll send them an automated email, but they'll have a reply to. So it starts one-to-many, but for the right customer, it can become one-to-one. And for the high-touch segment, we'll send a customized email and offer to jump on a call right away. That's just an example, but it's a way to think about how to structure those touch points and customize them for different segments. Okay, so now we've know what we're focusing on. We've learned about our customers. We have a strategy of how to engage with them. I want to share my thoughts on how we execute on this. And the first thing I want to talk about is creating a culture of experimentation. I think especially in the early days, this is really important because we have no idea what's going to work and what's not going to work at the beginning, or what's going to resonate with customers and what won't. So having this mindset of experimentation means that we're more focused on learning than on necessarily achieving results, because a lot of our experiments will fail, but it's really important to learn from those experiments. So this is an example of an experiment that I set up at Notion, so a premium onboarding offering. And the point is, it's not super sophisticated. It's not like a growth teams A/B testing, but rather it's just, let's set a clear hypothesis. Let's know exactly which KPIs we want to impact. Let's know who our audience is and know how we're going to engage with them. And when I create this, I actually also just show what the message is going to be, because it helps me remember which one those were, especially if I'm running multiple experiments at the same time. When I think about experimentation and setting these up, this is also a principle that I find helpful and important. The concept of proving it in a lab before you build it in a factory. So when we set up an experiment, it doesn't need to be scalable from day one. In fact, if you make it scalable from day one, you've probably invested too much time in setting things up. It's better to do something that's not scalable to start with, to prove the concept, and then once you've found an experiment that seems to be working, then figure out how to scale it. The last concept I want to talk about is closing the loop. I think in sales and customer success, we have and support, we have the luxury of being the people that are most in touch with our customers. And in fact, we know more about our customers than most of the rest of the company. We know what they love about our product, what they don't like, why they churn, why they upgrade, et cetera. And it's really important for our teams to be giving that feedback to the rest of the company, and most importantly to product, so that we're continuously improving and learning from those interactions. So at Typeform, what we did is created a customer voice presentation, which we gave on a monthly basis and then on a quarterly basis, where we aggregated information from all the different sources where we collected information, like our help center, support tickets, sales and customer CSM calls, NPS surveys, and churn surveys. And so we aggregate all that data, and then we can identify trends. What are the reasons people are churning, the same reasons that people aren't upgrading? Is it the same feedback we get on NPS and support tickets? And through that, we can inform decisions and ideally specifically the product roadmap. Typeform and Notion are both very product-driven companies, so I believe that the biggest impact I can have for the company and for my customers is influencing the product roadmap and continuously helping to improve. So we're already at the end of my talk. I'm now going to share some takeaways, and I hope you have some questions prepared. So the takeaways are focus. Make it clear not just what you're saying yes to, but also what you're going to say no to. Learn about your customers, and specifically learn about their jobs to be done. When you think about engagement, make sure you're tailoring your engagement model to specific different customer profiles. And when you're thinking about execution, focus on learning from your experiments and making sure that you're closing the loop with the rest of the company and specifically with product. And that's it. Thank you. Any questions?
Awesome. Thanks so much. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions, so
Cool.
Thank you.